Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Brian, and if you're anything like me, you're probably a bit hesitant to use a third-party dock with the Switch 2. A reasonable concern, considering that third-party docks literally bricked the original Switch. But is this really something we need to be concerned about with the Switch 2? Certainly things have changed since the launch of the original Switch, right? Well, to figure that out, let's talk about what the issue was with the original Switch in the first place, what's changed with the Switch 2, and why, despite those changes, you probably still want to avoid those third-party docks, though perhaps not for the reason you think. Both the Switch and the Switch 2 charge and deliver video via USB-C. We take for granted that all USB-C are built equally, and while that may be true today, though it is a pretty broad standard, there are some differences. When devices were first integrating USB-C, it was like the Wild West. Different manufacturers had different power standards, different data transfer limits, the integrated batteries were built differently, everything was its own thing. And when Nintendo was preparing the Switch in the years before the 2017 launch, few parts were standard across all USB-C devices. And when it comes to Nintendo specifically, you can trust that when given the opportunity to break away from standards, they will. The original Switch was no different. Even though it looks like a standard USB-C port, the cable seemingly a standard USB-C, Nintendo had some proprietary shenanigans built into their USB-C and battery charging system that prevented it from playing well with non-Nintendo docks. Essentially, the original Switch had a very specific non-standard power delivery system, mostly because the standards we have today weren't in place yet, and this power delivery system was temperamental. It had very specific requirements that, if not met, bad things would happen. If too much power comes in, the Switch's power management chip can fry, leading to major hardware failures. On the other hand, if too little power is supplied, the system may suddenly shut down or glitch, which won't usually damage hardware, but can corrupt files or even the operating system if it happens at the wrong moment. This overpower, underpower issue is actually the main concern when it comes to manufacturing chargers and docks, not just for Nintendo products, but for any product, and is as true today as it was then. If you build a generic charger or a power brick, you want to build enough overhead that it can provide power in case the device is huge and has a massive power requirement, but can also scale down its power delivery for smaller devices that don't need as much juice. I know it's an oversimplification, but that's essentially what they're trying to avoid. When Nintendo built the original Switch, not only did it have a very specific non-standard power delivery requirement, but it also refused to communicate with third-party docks. This communication is referred to as a handshake. This handshake is a little conversation all devices have when they first connect to each other, an introduction where they identify themselves, their abilities, and their requirements. Nintendo decided that their handshake was going to be a secret handshake. Nintendo built the original Switch to speak only to the official Nintendo Switch dock, which meant third-party docks didn't know how much power to deliver to safely power and charge the Switch without overvolting or undervolting and leading to damage. When the Switch was plugged into a third-party dock that did not know the secret Nintendo handshake, it would just guess how much power to provide to the system at any given moment. And since power needs rise and fall depending on what the device is doing, it would be essentially impossible to deliver the exact right amount of power at any given moment without that handshake and communication between the dock and the device, potentially leading to a damaging amount of electricity entering the Switch. And on top of that, whether due to Nintendo's design or just the limitations of the technology at the time, there weren't enough safeguards built into the hardware to prevent the wrong amount of power from entering the Switch. So instead of saying, hey, whoa, you're not my dock, why don't you keep all that electricity to yourself? it would just let in a wave of electricity that, unsurprisingly, would damage the Switch. Fortunately, USB-C has come a long way in the last 8 years, and whether or not Nintendo would want to make a proprietary delivery system, it's just cheaper to buy standard parts from the various manufacturers around the world. And when you are using standard parts, you need standard communication. So now the power delivery system, both in its physical components and communication, has become essentially the same that you'd find in any of your larger USB-C devices, your cell phones, laptops, chargers, everything. Which means the Switch 2 will not brick with third-party chargers. The Handshake is no longer a secret. The power delivery system now has standard power requirements. The hardware has better power management built into it. The chips themselves include protection circuitry that isolate the system from bad voltages. This means you can now charge your Switch on the go with the same cables, the same chargers, the same power banks that you would for any other similarly sized devices like other tablets, laptops, or gaming handhelds. The worst thing that will likely happen if your charger is not suitable for the Switch 2, unless there is a defect with the device, is that it just won't accept whatever cable or charger you're trying to use, and the system just won't charge. No damage, it would just reject it outright. But charging is only half of the equation. The Switch dock is not just a charger. It also allows you to transmit video from the Switch to your television or monitor. Video output is the primary function of the dock for the Switch 2. If you want to just charge your Switch, you just plug it directly into the wall using any USB-C cable and power supply rated for 60 watt or above. But if you want to see your Switch on a screen, whether it's your TV or a monitor, you'll still need to use the dock. And this is where third-party docks still have a problem. Remember those handshakes I was talking about? Well, they're not just for power delivery. And while Nintendo may have been forced to use the standard handshake for their power delivery system, they still have the opportunity to make a secret handshake for video output. So when you plug your Switch 2 into the dock, there are two different handshakes. One handshake is for power, the other for video. And most third-party docks will likely fail that second handshake, at least for the time being. They should still charge your Switch 2, you just can't use them for video, which is kind of the whole point of the dock. And this is a huge disappointment. The Switch 2, like its predecessor, is built to travel. Without a travel dock, which Nintendo has yet to make, by the way, there is no means with which you can take your Switch 2 on the road and still use it on a TV. Unless wherever you're going already has an official dock from Nintendo, or you lug around the whole docking system in one of those giant travel cases that Nintendo makes. Wouldn't it be great if you could just use a USB-C hub like the one you use for a laptop that fits right into your bag? And for anyone who might be saying, Brian, you also need the Switch 2 official dock because of cooling the built-in fan, let me remind you of this breakdown from the Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which explains how the fan built into the dock just cools the dock itself, not the Switch 2. The Switch 2 cools itself whether it's in the dock or not. Cooling is not a factor when it comes to using a travel dock or third-party dock. I've seen a lot of confusion on this, and I just want to make that very clear. So there is no performance issue or safety issue that Nintendo would be trying to avoid by preventing you from using a third-party dock. Now, there are currently third-party docks that either claim to work with the Switch 2 or people have found that they work despite the manufacturer not explicitly saying it has Switch 2 compatibility. I've seen a list online of compatible third-party docks, but I'm not going to put that here, and the reason is because that list is going to change. If enough third-party dock manufacturers crack the code and learn Nintendo's secret handshake, Nintendo will just change the handshake. They don't need to send their massive team of lawyers after these third-party companies. All they have to do is update their firmware. Once they update the firmware on the device and the dock with the new handshake, all of those third-party docks that people are spending their hard-earned money on will suddenly stop working. Could these third-party companies figure out the new Handshake? Sure. Then Nintendo would just come up with a new one and brick them all over again, and this game of cat and mouse could go on forever. I cannot recommend that anyone spend any money on a third-party dock for the Switch 2 until Nintendo decides to change its policy on limiting access to video output. Will they change this policy? Who knows? What incentive do they have to do so? At least you can use third-party docks, chargers, and portable batteries to charge your Switch 2 without fear of bricking it. But if you want to use the Switch 2 with a display, for the moment at least, you're stuck with the official Switch 2 dock. I do hope that Nintendo changes its policy, opens up the Switch 2 to be used with third-party docks for video output, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And if they're not, I hope they at the very least come out with their own travel dock. To have a portable system without the ability to connect to screens on the go when the technology exists, it's just kind of a bummer. A lot has changed since the original Switch launched 8 years ago. There's just no reason we should be bound to the same limitations on the Switch 2. But what do you think? Do you wish there were options when it came to docks? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe to see all of my videos to come. Consider following me on Instagram to be notified whenever a new video goes live. And if you are still here, thank you so much for watching. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, peace.